Welcome everyone to our Ordinary Council meeting here today at the Corporate Centre. East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcast and to enhance the accessibility of its meetings to the broader East Gippsland community. These recordings are also archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate times during the meeting, any members of the gallery who are addressing the Council will have their image, comments and submissions recorded. Please ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are turned off or in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. Also a special welcome to some Junior Rotary Award students in the gallery today. Arthur Moser from Bairnsdale Primary School 754, Sarah Muir from St Mary's, Taylor Hughes from Lucknow Primary, Pippa Young from Gippsland Grammar, Georgia Steele from Gippsland Grammar and Elise Pearce from Gippsland Grammar. Welcome. On behalf of Council, I'd like to acknowledge the Gunai-Kurnai people, the traditional owners of land on which we are gathered, and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. Today we have Director Bennett, as the CEO, is an apology for today's meeting. Do we have any other apologies, Ms Bennett?
Sorry, we have an apology from Councillor Marianne Peltz.
It's on there.
An apology from Councillor Marianne Peltz, Mr Mayor.
And I believe there was an apology for Councillor O'Connell as well, submitted. Item 1.3 is declaration of conflicts of interest. Is there any declarations, Ms Bennett?
No, Mr Mayor, not to me.
Item 1.4, that the minutes of the Ordinary Council meeting held on the 7th of August 2018 be confirmed. We have a mover for that confirmation.
Happy to move that the minutes are a true and correct record of the previous ordinary meeting of this council.
Moved Councillor Ellis. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Toohey. Is there any questions? I'll put the confirmation. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Item 1.5 are our next meetings. We have a special council meeting to approve annual financial statements for the 2017-2018, and that's in principle on Tuesday the 11th of September 2018, and it will be held at this corporate centre, commencing at 6 p.m. And then we have another ordinary council meeting on Tuesday the 2nd of October 2018 also to be held in this corporate centre, commencing at 6 p.m. Item 1.6, a request for leaves of absence.
Mr Mayor,
Councillor Ellis.
I'd like to put a leave of absence from the ordinary meeting to be held on the 2nd of October 2018.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis.
I also have a request for a leave of absence from the 22nd to the 9th to the 6th to the 10th inclusive, and I believe that will cover the same ordinary council meeting. Thank
you, Councillor Roberts. So put that, all those in favour of those. We need a motion in relation to the leave of absence. Councillor Reeves, that the...
I so move that the requests for leave of absence be accepted, councillors.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor White. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. Thank you. Item 1.7, public question time. Ms Bennett, do we have public questions?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have 3 public questions. The first is from Louise Crisp. Louise, are you in the gallery? Would you like to read your question? If you do, I'll ask you to come to the table for the microphone.
Thank you, councillors and director. My question, I'm sorry, I just introduced myself. I'm Secretary of Gippsland Environment Group. My question regards the East Gippsland Shire's MOU with Round Oak Minerals. The original Banambra mine was operated by Denhurst Limited from 1992 to 96. pardon me, in 1998 the company went into administration and walked away from the site, forfeiting its $375,000 rehabilitation bond. Danhurst left behind a tailings dam containing 700,000 tonnes of tailings, leaking acid and heavy metals, zinc, copper, cadmium, manganese, lead and arsenic into Straight Creek on the headwaters of the Tambo River. The dam had been constructed without a spillway and was at risk of breaching. The dam was also constructed using a concrete grout curtain and plastic liner on the inside of the dam wall to prevent seepage, both measures which have a limited lifespan, whereas the tailings must remain quarantined from the downstream environment forever. In 2006, the Department of Primary Industry rehabilitated the mine site and tailings dam at a total cost to the taxpayer of almost $7 million. Between 1999 and 2005, the EPA permitted releases of 160 megalitres of contaminated water from the dam to prevent the dam wall overtopping, and additional releases of 140 megalitres prior to remediation works on the dam wall and construction of a spillway. The EPA permitted discharge limits for zinc that were 20 times higher than the ANZAC 95% protection for biodiversity freshwater limits, yet this was exceeded to such an extent that releases had to be halted, with zinc levels almost 800 times higher than the objective. The dam is currently leaking contaminated water at a rate of 86,000 litres per day, and the spillway operates as a flow-through system into Straight Creek depending on rainfall. At a site visit in February 2018 with Earth Resources staff, Gippsland Environment Group collected water samples from seepage emerging from midway down the spillway and from a pondage at the foot of the dam. Zinc levels were 12 to 21 times higher than the ANZAC 95% protection levels, and copper was 9 to 50 times higher. Before Round Oak Minerals can begin work on raising the dam wall to expand the tailings dam, they will have to lower the water level, and this is according to the EES, by 3 metres over the 8-hectare dam surface area. This water will go straight into Straight Creek and to Tambo River. My questions are as follows. 1. In the event of serious contamination of the Tambo River from the tailings dam, as has happened recently in the last few weeks on the Walsh River in Queensland, what measures has the East Gippsland Shire, in consultation with East Gippsland Water, taken to develop an emergency management plan to provide a backup water supply for local farmers and the township of Swifts Creek, which is only 30 kilometres downstream from the dam? 2. Will the substantial financial support the East Gippsland Shire Council has provided to Round Oak Minerals, including the $40,000 MOU commitment and the $90,000 purchase of the old Benambra School, despite the Council being cognizant of the serious environmental risks posed by this project, expose the Council to a legal and financial liability in the event of failure of the tailings dam and contamination of the Tambo River? 3. Did the East Gippsland Shire Council also contribute funds through an MOU with Independence Group, the previous owner of the Stockman project? And if so, how much? Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could ask Ms Nelson, Director Community Strategy, to provide a response.
Thank you. Yes, in respect to all three questions, the first question was around whether East Gippsland Shire has any emergency management plans to provide backup water supply, and I can say that that's not the case. It's not something that Council has responsibility for, and Council has no obligation to manage the impact that if there was the situation where there was contaminated water release, that's not something that this Council would have responsibility for or deal with. In fact, the approvals processes are something quite separate from Council's responsibilities associated with the design of the tailings dam and its management into the future. So the answer to that is no. Whether that's a requirement, I'm not aware of that being something that has been specifically addressed, but it may well have been. In respect to financial support by East Gippsland Shire to Round Oak Minerals, and reference was made to $40,000 mentioned in the MOU, which is being considered by Council today, and also the purchase of the Benambra School. These are things that Council has, the MOU is something that Council entered into some time ago as a positive approach to maximising the benefits the community as a result of this mine, should it proceed. And in entering into an MOU, we have focused on things that are outside the normal remit of formal approvals processes associated with this operation. So focusing on things that are a voluntary commitment by both council and the mine proponents. In entering into an MOU and agreeing to undertake action, then it's appropriate to commit some level of resource to implementation of those actions. And the MOU that's before council today does talk about allocating $40,000 towards those agreed actions. I know there has been some concern about the fact that there is mention of this amount of money provided by both organisations and managed jointly. And so the wording in the MOU that's presented today makes it very clear that both organisations will manage their own funds. It's not to be managed jointly, and that there will be agreement reached on how those resources are actually managed and implemented, what's implemented as a priority action. So in respect to the MOU, currently as proposed, it's not a case of handing the mining company $40,000. It's a case of committing some resources to getting the outcomes and actions that we are saying are appropriate to be pursued on behalf of the community. And we have never handed over $40,000 in respect to question 3, never handed $40,000 to past mine owners, project owners. There's been, as indicated in the report, only very few actions taken because at the time that we were dealing with this prior to now, it was premature to act on most of or many of the actions in the MOU, so there's been very little resource actually put to implementation. In respect to the Benambra Primary School, Council was very open about the process with this school site, because we identified it as providing the greatest potential for benefit to the community and to the Benambra community in particular, by having the transport interchange located in the town where there was the opportunity for local community people and businesses to benefit from that number of people actually going through the town. The school has been purchased by council because ultimately it is a community asset that will be retained in that community. It is to be leased to Round Oak Minerals for that purpose, so that they are paying to occupy the site, and they will also be investing back in that facility for the benefit ultimately of the community. So these are actions that were flagged through the EES process and the Planning Single Limit process, all very public and known at the time in terms of how we were going to look at putting this in place. And these are actions that are approved for use outside of the environmental requirements that the mine operators have to meet. So it's not linked to that. We're simply pursuing opportunities to maximise benefits for the community. It's ultimately up to the Victorian Government whether the environmental approvals are deemed to be appropriate. If that answers the question.
Next question.
Thank you. The next question is from Joe Moulton. Is Joe in the gallery? No. Unfortunately, the rules require that the questioner is in the gallery, so I'll table that question and we'll respond to Ms Moulton separately. The third and final question is from Lisa Roberts. Is Lisa in the gallery? No. Has she appointed you as her representative? Just one moment, please. Would you like to read the question, or would you like me to do so? Okay, thank you. So the question is, given that Friends of Bats and Habitat Gippsland have representatives from the following groups: Gippsland Plains Conservation Management Network, East Gippsland Rainforest Conservation Management Network, Gippsland Environment Group, Lake Tyers Coast Action, Eagle Point Land Care Coast Care, Environment East Gippsland, Bairnsdale Urban Land Care Group, Nungurna Land Care Group, Bairnsdale Junior Field Naturalists, Friends of the Gippsland Lakes, East Gippsland Wildlife Rehabilitators Inc., Victorian Advocates for Animals, Friends of Bats and Bush Care Inc. Yarra Bend, Friends of Bats and Habitat Gippsland represent over 200 concerned individual residents of East Gippsland supporting the current grey-headed flying fox roost site in Bairnsdale being protected and managed as a conservation reserve. And the question is, will East Gippsland Shire Council be undertaking consultation with Friends of Bats and Habitat Gippsland as a way of moving forward? Once again, I'll ask Ms Nelson to respond.
Thank you. Yes, we are aware of Friends of Bats and Habitat Gippsland and have had a meeting with the group when it was first formed and have undertaken to include them in any stakeholder engagement that we undertake in respect to activities associated with the management of the vegetation along the Mitchell River walking trail. The report presented today to Council about this matter indicates that we do believe it's appropriate that Council reviews its position in respect to the bats longer term, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in today. We can, while we haven't worked out exactly what that review will encompass, then happy to take on board for them to complete this group.
Thank you, Ms Nelson. Is there any further public questions? Councillor Ellis, got a question?
If I may, to Ms Bennett, just to clarify for the community in relation to Ms Moulton's question. Unfortunately, she was unable to make it here today, but was able to drop a question to the council. Can you explain to the council why it is that her question couldn't be read, particularly if it is, as I believe, associated with the bats?
Council's local law prescribes the rules, for want of a better term, under which public questions can be posed. And number 2 of those rules is the person named on the form as submitting the question must be at the meeting or have a representative present. And the reason for that, of course, is it's appropriate if a person has a question that is of sufficient import for Council to address it in this forum, we like for that person or a representative to be present to both give the question and receive the response.
Right, and then the follow-through then, I assume, is that a full, detailed written response would be made to the person submitting the question, which would be a public document.
That's correct, Councillor Ellis, and indeed a copy of that response is appended to the minutes.
Thank you.
Is there any further questions on that? Thank you. Ms Bennett, item 1.8.1 is Assemblies of Councillors, August 2018, and there is a recommendation. Moved Councillor Reeves, seconded Councillor Ellis. Any questions? All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Item 1.9, Ms Bennett, any petitions?
No, Mr Mayor.
Item 2, any notices of motion or rescissions?
No, thank you.
Any deferred business?
No, Mr Mayor.
That brings us to item 4, councillor reports. Councillor Tui, would you like to start, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have emailed my report to council officers, and I did a couple of things in the last month. One of which I would like to speak of because it was something that, excuse me, I particularly enjoyed a bit over a week ago, excuse me, was a planning consultation mediation session, which was an opportunity for some members of our community to oppose a proposal to council to build a house on a property. And the resulting conversation that was had by all those people with the proponents, and the outcome that come of that, which was that they learnt quite a number of things about how our system works, and I think come to a better understanding of the situation that everybody faced in regards to how the process worked. And I feel quite confident that everybody left that meeting of the understanding that they could move forward and actually point out some issues and hopefully get them addressed and come to a resolution that was suitable for everybody. So that was something. It was the first time I had been to one of those consultation mediation meetings, and I must say I found it very enjoyable. So it certainly was a very interesting thing for me to do. So very much enjoyed it. Thank you.
I might add, Councillor Toohey, that was very well chaired too, so I thank you for chairing that mediation. Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Good evening. I'm so used to doing this in the evening. Good afternoon, everyone. My report draws attention quickly to the visit recently by Minister Jayla Pulford, and that was quite important for us in our area as she had a focus on drought matters. She visited a number of properties in the Shire and also had a really useful Q&A with members of the community up at the Delop office afterwards. Just draw our attention to a rather alarming and fast-running wildfire near home, but in our Shire at Cape Conran, only in the last couple of weeks, which is most unseasonal and really does draw our attention to the fact that we are in drought conditions. And amazingly, at the same time, we had avalanche warnings at Mount Hotham as there was a wildfire raging at Cape Conran, which says something about the crazy weather conditions we have at the moment. And lastly, councillors, many of us met with our colleagues at East Gippsland Water for our regular MOU meeting, and it's a very useful and amicable relationship, just as it should be. And there's a number of really useful and productive joint initiatives that are of mutual benefit. But even though it looks like an easy thing to do to have a meeting, an MOU like that, any good relationship requires constant care, communication and good interaction, just like any good contemporary relationship.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Among other things I did in the month of September, one thing I'd like to mention was just this Sunday gone on the 2nd of September, I attended the Buchan Drone Flying Day organised by the Buchan Neighbourhood House. Now, what I thought was going to be a pretty relaxed day of geeks flying toy helicopters, there was actually a representative from a club in Melbourne called Eastside FPV Club, which they're the largest, if not the largest in the country, if not the world, competitive drone racing organisation. Now, they are home to Thomas Bitmarta, who is a dual world champion, only just turned 18 this year, and was recently dubbed the Roger Federer of drone racing. Now, drone racing is a rapidly growing sport, if you call it that loosely, but it aims to engage kids in STEM programs, because these drones are often custom built by their operators. They're not something that you can go down to Dick Smith or JB Hi-Fi and pick up off the shelf. You've got to build it yourself, program it. There's soldering, there's engineering involved, and discussing with the representative of Eastside was really great, because they're looking at potentially putting on a regional event and adding it to their racing calendar. And Buchan was the name that was getting thrown around. So potentially we could be getting quite a large spectacle event coming to East Gippsland Shire. So it was a really positive meeting, and we swapped details, and yeah, hopefully we'll see something coming forward.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My report has also been previously prepared and has been forwarded to admin. A couple of matters I'll just mention. I represent council at the farewell for outgoing CEO Rob Spence in Melbourne recently. Rob has provided local government with sterling service over many years, and he will certainly be missed. It was a quite memorable gathering. In company with Councillor Peltz, we attended the Australian Timber Council's annual forum and conference in Melbourne. The presentations will be made available to councillors once they become available and circulated. One of the striking things for me that came out of that was the need for over 100,000 hectares of plantation timber just to maintain the industry aside from outside the other current political issues of native forest harvesting. I also attended a meeting with the Victorian Association of Forest Industries and with those gentlemen discussed the future of the timber industry in our state and particularly our region. I was in quite a number of meetings I attended. One I attended which had a strong impression upon myself was in company with other councillors attending the Bensdale Community Precinct, or Hub as it's called now, and meeting with Executive Officer Jane Ponting and her team at the Hub. Mrs Ponting is a particularly capable person and is now providing excellent services to our community, and I look forward to her ambitions for the future being achieved. I will just not refer to the other meetings, but there is one extra matter I would like to bring to councillors' attention, and it's been prompted by Councillor Buckley, who is on suspension, and that is council acknowledging the life of former Tambo Shire councillor Mr Wally Stevenson. Mr Stevenson served on the former Shire for a period of 17 years and served 2 terms as president of that particular council. I know that we've previously acknowledged his passing, but I would like to, on behalf of Council, Mr Mayor, express Council's condolences to his family in relation to that matter. That's all I need to report this week. Thank you.
Yep, so do we need a formal motion in relation to the condolence?
I don't think we need. Do we need a motion?
I think it's a nice matter of record for the family, yes.
Mr Mayor, with your accedance, I would like to propose that Council acknowledge the passing of former Councillor Stevenson and that the matter be recorded in the minutes.
Yep. And that's been moved, Councillor Ellis, seconded Councillor White. All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Councillor White.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. One of the first things I'd speak about, and that probably goes to reinforce what Councillor Reeve said earlier about the bushfire in Marlow, or in Conran. We had a Shire emergency management meeting on the 9th of August, and of course the focus was on how dry it was, and the fact that within about a week we will have actual fire restrictions enforced, which is as early probably as anyone could ever remember. And the discussion was about that and how dry the forest is, etc., and the fact that that in their prescribed burns this year, DELP have actually only been able to perform 10% of their work. So in other words, we have a very dense forest out there that's very dry. So we just hope that it doesn't catch a lot this summer. But during the meeting, of course, there are many health authorities and AMBOs, etc., at these meetings, and the focus quickly turned to the drought and the effect on individuals and what they may be going through. So it's the consensus from that was that for everyone to please keep an eye on local farmers, just to say good day, or just to keep an eye on their well-being at this stage. So then also a very informative conference, which was the beef conference held in Bensdale. It also had a fair reference to the drought, and it was focused on feeding techniques and the quality of feeds, etc. Unfortunately, this type of conference would be well and truly booked in advance, but it would have been very handy for all of us to have gotten this information perhaps 4 or 5 months ago. But it was still quite valuable, and I, for one, have taken up quite a few of the lessons learnt from that, for my own personal, looking after my animals. Then, of course, as mentioned, the MOU with East Gippsland Water was invaluable, and it's good to see I'll meet with the directors from their organisation who have a diverse background, so it was quite an informative meeting. And then the other evening, Friday evening, it was a dinner down in Lakes Entrance put on by some of the local fishermen to showcase their wild catch and their passion, and of course the restaurateur, their passion for wanting to use this local produce and showcase it to everybody. So it was a particularly good evening, enjoyed by all, and there was quite a bit of discussion around certain things that are going on in the fishing industry at the moment. And then lastly, with regard to some of the funding that may be available to shires coming from the federal government, we've been tasked with trying to think of a good way that this could be used for drought-affected areas. And the amount of money is not a great deal per farm that may be eligible, but I discussed this with our local federal member, Darren Chester, that I wondered if we could introduce something like a solar panel buy or given it to eligible people in the country for this shire, and if it was to be taken up and was accepting by the people, that we would be also helping some of the businesses in the towns, not all of them of course, but plumbers, solar suppliers, electricians, and of course the council itself. Our shire has our solar initiatives in progress at the moment, and that I would like to perhaps get some discussion on this, that we could look along these lines, and it would not be a great cash injection for rural people, but it would be something that would be ongoing for a long time and serve them well. And I also think environmentally it would put the shire in perhaps at the leading edge of other councils in the country if we were to introduce something of this nature, if it was to be taken up. So thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor White. So I'd like to start off, just highlight a couple of things out of my report. The first one was the Gippsland Small Business Festival, which kicked off at the start of the month, and this year's guest speaker was Gus Belbonton. Gus was the former Executive Director and Chief Technologist at Lonely Planet, and he shared some stories with the small business community of East Gippsland on how he had to get Lonely Planet out of thinking that their travel books were going to be around forever, which, because they were market leaders, they thought that printed travel books would never go out of vogue, and as we know, the case is quite different. So it was quite interesting to learn how he had to change the mindset of that powerful organisation after being market leader for so long, and how to transition into an electronic version of what they'd been promoting. The second one, in relation to the beef event that Councillor White mentioned, it happens to be the biggest beef event in Victoria, and the organisers, in conjunction with Ag Victoria, had to cap the numbers because we don't actually have a suitable venue for holding those types of events. So whilst it's good, it's also a challenge that if we want to grow events like that, it is a requirement looking at the availability of suitable venues. Also, the Gippstar Awards were on during the month, and we were well represented in East Gippsland. We had Ashley Nichols for swimming. At the age of 10, he's already broken so many swim records, I couldn't remember them all, but I think he'll actually be someone that we'll see standing on the blocks at an Olympics, I believe. We had Jack Perrott, track and field, Lakes Entrance. We had Sydney Churchman, equestrian from Bairnsdale. Ashlyn Jones, as we know, is a great, not only great at her sport, but also a great young role model. So she took out the Open Gippstar Award, which was fantastic. Another thing that really impressed me during the month was the East Gippsland United Footy Club under 15 girls fundraiser. It was an incredible showcase of hospitality, in particular customer service matched with fine dining. Not looking for a free handout, this young, well-disciplined W team assisted our internationally accredited local chef, Rob Turner. They assisted Rob in preparing and serving an exceptional world-class meal, and the money they raised from the night will assist the girls in funding their way to the Australian Football School International Soccer Tournament to be held in Shepparton. Rob Turner is another identity that's created a destination restaurant right here in Bairnsdale. The former Yellow Belly Deli is now being rebranded Northern Ground to showcase his heritage out of the UK, and you can witness how popular our soccer game is here locally. If you drive past Howard Park any Thursday night, you can see the numbers of people there training. So I think it's watch this space, and we've certainly identified that in our strategic sporting master plan. The other really exciting thing was the official opening of the AFMA building, the Australian Fisheries Management Authority, a business which has been, if you like, decentralised out of Canberra and put to where the actual industry is. So we have 13 well-paid professionals now located in the CMAC building at Bullock Island Lakes entrance. The new office was an opportunity to recognise the hard work's gone into such a project and getting it to move from Canberra. It just so happens that the Lakes entrance port is Australia's largest Commonwealth fishing port. The month finished off really well with the Gippsland Business Awards, and I'd like to give a big shout out for Sailor's Grave Brewing, who took out the Food and Wine Beer Award, which is a category that East Gippsland Shire sponsors. So I was really happy to give that to Gabby and Chris Moore. Sailor's Grave Brewing is a family business run by Gabby and Chris. It's an independent brewery in Orbost. The business is enjoying significant growth due to the hard work and determination by the owners. It has distribution in 7 states, and it's another great example of thinking locally, acting globally. Gabby and Chris say the people, places and the produce that make their beers are the strength behind their brand and the lifeblood of their product. They aim to strengthen their tiers to the region and obviously continue to promote Orbost and East Gippsland through their locally inspired beer. Thank you. Item 5.1.1 is Officers' Report and new fees and charges on mobile stage and outdoor cinema, and we have Mr. Wayne Richards in attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, you'd be aware that we've recently taken on management responsibility for a mobile stage, the intent being to hire this out, and we think there'll be some significant community benefit from this. To do this requires fees and charges, so we've developed some fees and charges. The philosophy or the reasoning behind those fees are included in the report. So these fees are presented for endorsement to publicly advertise, with the intent to bring this back for adoption following the feedback period. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep my question short. Can you tell us about the agreement that council's entered into? What does it entail in relation to this matter, please?
Essentially, it's as if council owned the mobile stage and equipment, so includes responsibility for storage, maintenance, operation of it, etc. There is a lease fee for this, which was essentially 5% of the total cost of the stage. The total cost of the stage and equipment is, the total value is around about 170,000. So that was about 6,500 annual fee for 2 years.
And who do we pay this to, and how did it come into council's line of activities?
The payment is to essentially the gentleman that organised it, so John Dawson from Dawson's. the intent, my understanding of my intent from the discussion with Mr. Darvison is that that fee will be donated back to the community. So it's not for profit for Mr. Darvison.
I recently read in an article outside of council the details of this stage, and stating that it's worth $180,000, that it includes 2 generators, 100 chairs, two gazebos and ancillary equipment. What responsibility does council have for the maintenance and use and care of these particular assets?
As mentioned, council will manage it as if it owned those. So all responsibilities for the management and maintenance of those will sit with council.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I look forward to this matter coming back with, as per the motion before council.
Any other questions? There is a recommendation before us, councillors. Do we have a mover for the recommendation? Move Councillor Roberts, seconded Councillor Toohey. Speakers for the motion? Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
I'd like to, I've been contacted by quite a few community groups over some time regarding the need for a facility like this in the Shire. Now I can hear the concern in Councillor Ellis's voice, but I think overall I think this could be a beneficial asset for council to have and provide a medium for the arts and performance, especially in our more regional centres. I think if managed correctly this could be really valuable.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. The seconder, would you like to add? Councillor Toohey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concur with Councillor Roberts and think this will be a great asset for our outlying communities.
Speakers against? Councillor Ellis.
No, this matter's going out for public consultation, so I'd be foolish to speak against it, Mr. Mayor. But what I am raising is my concern as to the costs of the facility if it's to be an asset for the assistance of our small community groups. I'm also concerned about the burden that will be placed on council officers. I note that we have a new unit called the Community Programs Unit to address these. So I look forward to a further and more in-depth conversation in relation to council's role in taking on such assets that have traditionally been outside council's core businesses. So hopefully it will, as Councillor Roberts alludes, will be a great benefit to the wide community of East Gippsland, but we'll wait and see. And hopefully my comments might create some interest in the community and we'll get some positive or negative feedback, whatever the case may be. Thank you.
Is there any further speakers for the motion? Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for raising the matters, Councillor Ellis. Economics 101 says that you can't cut your way to success, that we have to invest in our community, have to invest socially, financially, environmentally, emotionally. The great thing about this is that we haven't made the capital outlay. It's been a donation, a generous donation, and the whole community celebrates that. I'm looking forward to hearing the feedback from the community about the schedule of fees and charges, and then if they're accepted, to it being used to its maximum.
Thanks, Councillor Reeves. Any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour of the motion? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 5.1.2 is the Bairnsdale Sporting Facilities Plan, and Mr. Richards again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, council would be aware that council is responsible for a significant amount of sporting infrastructure across the region. Development of this and management of this needs to be done in a strategic manner with a long-term vision. This plan has been developed and provides that vision and strategy around the sporting facilities in Bairnsdale. It's worth noting that the plan was developed with significant community consultations. There was over 100 clubs consulted in the development of the plan. It was also put out for consultation following finalisation, and that draft plan received some 54 submissions. Quite a number of those were positive, and there was some really good feedback from those submissions. There were amendments made based on those submissions, which are detailed in the report, but it's now presented for adoption.
Thank you, Mr Richards. Questions from councillors? Councillor Ellis, do you have a question?
No, thanks, Mr Mayor. I've already raised my comments in relation to the missing of motorsports clubs in this study, and I accept the explanation provided by Mr Richards that they are part of a second area to be reviewed into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Any further questions? We have a recommendation before us. Do we have a mover for the recommendation? Moved Councillor Roberts, seconded Councillor Ellis. The speakers. Councillor Ellis, did you want to speak to?
It's okay.
There's very little to say. This is a positive step forward for the sporting infrastructure of our Shire, and in particular the City of Bairnsdale. I look forward to its implementation.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour of the motion? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 5.1.3 is the World Health Organisation Global Network of Age-Friendly Cities and Communities. Again, Mr Richards, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Again, councillors will be aware that we've been doing a significant amount of work in the age-friendly space. In recognition of this good work, but also to highlight Council's commitment to our ageing community, we're looking to apply to join the World Health Organisation Global Network of Age-Friendly Cities and Communities. The details of this application are within the report, but essentially there's no cost to Council, provides access to a number of resources, but also provides a level of accountability to Council. So we're essentially seeking endorsement of this application.
Any questions, councillors? We have a recommendation before us, councillors. We have a mover, Councillor Ellis, seconded Councillor White. Speakers.
Briefly, this is just a one small step in terms of Council addressing its ageing community and its responsibilities. It's been a matter for me for a number of years to create policy within Council to address the demands of an ageing population in East Gippsland. The statistics show that we need to be forward-thinking, and being part of a global network that will provide data and advice along the way is one of those small steps to ensure that we address our community's needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor White, did you want to add your comments?
Yes, I'd like to probably say the same, and in that from this data, that because of the changing age groups that we have coming to this area, that it then may put us in a position where we can attract further business and funding to this area to support that group. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor White. Any further speakers? Put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 5.2.1 is implementation of Vegetation Management Plan, Grey-Headed Flying Fox Colony, Mitchell River Walk, Bairnsdale, and we have Ms Nelson, Director of Community Strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As indicated earlier in the meeting, Council is being asked today to consider the closure of part of the Mitchell River walking track due to the presence of the bat colony and our inability to deal with some trees that present a hazard to users of that path. So councillors will be aware that we have management responsibility of Crown land along the urban part of the Mitchell River corridor in town, and it's perhaps one of the busiest and most well-used pieces of informal recreation infrastructure in Bairnsdale in terms of the number of users. Over many years we've, as a council, worked to remove a lot of the reed species along the river, and you can see that the impact of that revegetation work that's happened over quite a few years today. Growth that's actually there on both sides of the river. Council has sought and has obtained a to remove poplars on this last bit of the river, we need that permission to remove the habitat because it is used by the grey-headed blind foxes, which are protected species under that Commonwealth legislation. So we have that approval and we have removed vegetation in a staged way, completing stage 1 of the removal, and more recently have found ourselves having difficulty undertaking further vegetation management works in that part of the river corridor. That's primarily because the conditions that we need to meet are quite challenging because we are not to negatively impact on the bats, and their presence throughout the year makes that very difficult to actually undertake. At the same time as having received permission under the Commonwealth legislation, we also have sought independent advice about the risk associated with some of the trees in that part of the river corridor, and we are aware and have advice that some of those trees do present an unacceptable risk to council and users of the path. So in the absence of being able to undertake any specific tree management works to reduce that risk, the report presented today outlines some options that we've looked at to undertake to reduce that risk without being able to undertake tree removal or de-weighting of trees. And the recommendation is to close a section of the Mitchell River walking track just east of the dog hole, effectively through to where there's a little lookout where there's a connection back onto Riverine Street, with the proposition that for now we redirect people out to Riverine Street, up along onto the shared pathway and back onto the river track where it connects, I think, near Pike Street. Longer term, there is a need, as I indicated earlier, for council to understand how we do manage this section of vegetation and our role in that. And so the recommendation is that a further report should come back to council, but for now the recommendation of officers is that we do need to act given there is a risk there. There is an alternative at the moment for people to be directed around the colony, and that we need to close the track and communicate the rationale for that to users of the community generally. We have spoken with one of the key users who is an organised user, which is the park run operation that happens every weekend, and they understand the rationale and are happy to work with us to look at how we relocate the course in an appropriate way. So there will be, if council agrees with the recommendation today, there will be a need to communicate that to the community and to users and put a number of things in place to make that happen. But it would be action as soon as possible. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms Nelson. Questions, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ms Nelson, as the bats have been identified, as the trees have been identified as dangerous for some time now, what was the trigger that resulted in this motion coming before council, and why wasn't it considered earlier?
Well, we've known about the trees being dangerous for a little while since the report. I can't remember, it's a couple of years. And on the past 2 years when we have had potential opportunity to remove those trees, we haven't been able to do that. So we've monitored them as best we can in order to understand what level of, how they're travelling, because it's a risk assessment. It's not a prediction that a tree will fall in a particular time. So our arborists have been involved in monitoring those trees. But given some of them were assessed as having fairly imminent potential to impact on users, then we felt that in the circumstances it's better to take a proactive approach this year while we review the future access around this particular site. So it's a case of having been monitoring it, but I guess from an officer's perspective, reaching the point where we haven't been able to do the work, we don't know when we will be able to do the work, and recommending to council that action does need to happen in the absence of being able to get in there and do anything.
You have a follow-up question, Councillor?
According, this is
think that's an example of something that has changed since we submitted our application to the Commonwealth. The actual process of gaining the approval took around about 4 years. It was a very long, detailed process, and the reality is that very soon after we gained our approval, we actually had something like 60,000 bats inhabit the area. So there's been substantial shifts in the population and the length of time that they're staying. It is the case that the conditions on our permit now currently make it very difficult for work to take place, even to undertake work to meet our conditions of approval. And so I think there is an opportunity, there needs to be an opportunity created to review the circumstances. I'm also aware that the Commonwealth Government has freed up opportunities for councils to manage vegetation and colonies as well, and so in some cases it may be that it's easier to undertake work with the cooperation of the Victorian Government without a permit. So there's been a number of things change, and that's why I'm suggesting that we need to have a look. The council has always taken the view that the balance we're trying to seek is managing the risk to users, but also to the colony and to the organisation. And so we've taken a very risk-adverse approach to this and have elected not to do work on quite a number of occasions because it's just not appropriate to do that. But at the same time, we really need to be sensible about the fact that there are a large number of people actually accessing through that colony. So yes, I agree. There are a number of circumstances that have changed. Council finds itself between a rock and a hard place, really, in trying to manage that balance between the risks to everyone. And I think we need to just do a bit of a stock take and understand what does that mean into the future. So the intention would be to report back to council at an appropriate time to understand what the future might look like.
Yeah, Councillor Reeves had a question, and then Councillor White had a question.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Ms Nelson, so you've just alluded to what I was going to ask about, and that is in the recommendation point 5 about a report and undertaking a report and a review. And do you have a sense of a time frame for us on that?
Look, I think it might just take a little while to work through what all of the options are, given changes to the permissions that are actually required under the Commonwealth legislation into the future. Our permit is current until 2021, I think, and understanding what that means, whether we will actually be able to act on it and what risks council might be exposed to. We're also part of a CSIRO, University of Melbourne research project that is designed to assist councils to make good judgments about how to deal with the interaction between flying fox colonies and urban environments. So I'd like to say a couple of months before it comes back to a council meeting formally, just so that we can be clear about what all of the options are.
Thanks, Councillor Reeves. Councillor White.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Ms Nelson, the site visit that we undertook recently, I'm not an arborist, but is it possible to keep the track open by just removing the offending overhanging branches and not the entire trees? Because that would probably suit the bat colony and would also suit the people who like to use that river walk.
Thanks, Councillor White.
There is currently no ability to go in and undertake works in and around the colony under any, we don't have any permission to do that. We can't act on our Commonwealth permit because we're prevented from doing works from the end of July because there's too great a risk to the colony and the bats are fairly heavily pregnant. We would also need permission from the Victorian Government under the Wildlife Act to disrupt them. So no, there's not the ability to go in and do any work at all. The work that we were planning to do earlier a couple of months ago, I forget when it was, before the end of July anyway. It was removal of some trees and trimming of some trees, and we effectively don't have permission to do that. So in the view of officers, the best option for council is to seek to close the track. The intention and part of our approval requires us to construct an alternative access from the river track up to Riverine Street, so closer to the colony. Our aim would be ultimately to be able to do that work. It's designed and it's budgeted for, but we just need to have the right conditions so that we can undertake the work without causing an impact to the colony. If we can do that bit of work, then the detour around the colony is much more manageable for users, and I think that's part of the consideration that council needs to give to this matter as a longer term, what the longer term options are in terms of how we manage this part of the corridor.
Thanks, Ms Nelson. Councillor Roberts and Councillor Ellis.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Kate, do you think there's a potential for council to hand responsibility to another government body with more specific resourcing and experience around wildlife management?
No, I think that's an interesting question, only because I don't know that there are any, there are very few situations where people manage wildlife, sure in a national park and things like that, but certainly not in an urban environment. And I need to always emphasise we're not managing the wildlife, we're managing the vegetation here. And I think part of the consideration that we'll document for council is the reality is this is also a heavily used recreation facility, for want of a better word, and I think consideration needs to be given to who's best to managing that as an integrated piece of infrastructure for the Bairnsdale community as well. So we're looking at managing vegetation, we're not managing the bats, we're not pretending that we're going to manage the bats, like we don't manage any other bit of wildlife that's along the river corridor, but we do manage that piece of infrastructure on behalf of the community, and I think that's part of the thinking process that council will need to get its head around about who's best to manage that.
Councillor Ellis.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm taking on board Kate's responses to Councillor Reeves and Councillor Roberts' questions, because it is a complex matter, and the precinct that we're talking about is strong, not only ecological strengths, but it also has a high heritage meaning to many people in the city of Bairnsdale there, the track reaching to the port of Bairnsdale. And that leads me to my question, and I think that we probably need to be a bit more definitive, Kate, with our reporting back on this, and rather than saying perhaps 3 or 4 months or whatever, if we as a council could ask for the report that's coming back to have a time frame, perhaps to the December meeting. So is that possible, is the first one? Could we have that report to come to the ordinary meeting in December? That would allow 3 months, I think, which is reasonable. And
if I can just respond,
yeah, sure.
I'm assuming that will be possible. Part of the reason why I hadn't put a date on it is because not all of the information from the research project is probably going to be available in that time frame. And the reality is we're not going to be doing any work into next year. So council doesn't have to come to a conclusion immediately about what the future options are, and you can take the time to do that with that full information.
Good, thanks for that, and I take that on board, but as members of the public, as a member of the public, though, I would want to know, what sort of time frame is there? When can I go back to walking on my track that I've walked on for the last 5 years? So those sort of questions, and the right to do it. And you've also answered the cooperative work between the research groups. Again, that would have great weight and influence on any sort of future decision. So I look forward to hearing of that report coming in, and I take it that we may know something by December as well.
I can't guarantee that.
Is there any further questions? Councillor Tui's moving the recommendation. Do we have a seconder? Seconded Councillor Reeves. Any speakers? Councillor Tui.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to recommend this to councillors. It is a complex issue, as Councillor Ellis referred, but it does require an immediate action in order to ensure the safety of users of that track. It's potentially medium term and moving forward with the report that we can hopefully get sooner rather than later. You know, we can take some definitive action to allow us to deal with the issue and hopefully keep both things and have both things happen concurrently. So, thank you.
Councillor Tui, are you happy to add another dot point about the report coming back in December for a status update?
I'd welcome dot point 6 in that manner.
The seconder happy with it? Yep. Any further speakers? All those in favour? Against? Brings us to item 5.2.2. It's a proposal to end section 173 agreement AF8 11110G as it relates to PC 375513 at 4 Green Court, Eagle Point. Mr. Hollow.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, you will recall that this has come before Council previously and received in principle support. This is a report in front of Council today seeking to end the agreement, and that is the officer's recommendation. Councillors, in short, this parent property was provided with a planning permit to develop it with 4 townhouses. They weren't immediately built, and a subsequent subdivision of the land was applied for to be consistent with that 4-unit development. The subdivision permit was granted and required that any development on those lots that were created to be consistent with the development permit for clearly good planning purposes. Councillors, a landowner of 4 Green Court has purchased the property. They have consolidated 2 of the lots that were previously approved, and they have no intention to proceed with the development that was approved in 2004. Councillors, we believe that this makes good planning sense to end the agreement, as the lot will be able to be developed more in accordance with the planning scheme as it now stands, so it will be consistent with the current flooding levels of today. It will allow for the garden space as required under the general residential zone of today, and should the dwelling be constructed above 7.5 metres or be greater than 300 square metres, it will need to get a planning permit that would be consistent with the design development overlay schedule 14 for Eagle Point. On that basis, Council, there's a recommendation to seek to end the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hollow. Any questions from councillors? We have a recommendation before us. We have a mover. Move Councillor Tui. We have a seconder. Councillor White. Any speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. Thank you, Mr. Hollow. Item 5.2.3 is the Capital Works and Landfill Rehabilitation Projects Status Quarterly Report, or Quarter Report for 2017-18. Ms. Weigel, thank you.
Sorry, Mr Mayor. Councillors would be familiar with the quarterly reports that come on the Capital Works program and the landfill program on a quarterly basis for the first 3 quarters. This is the first time we've provided a quarterly report for the 4th quarter. Normally this information is tied up and held within the annual report. However, we felt that it was good to also present this report as a standalone report to give an overview of the year that's been and how the capital program has performed. Overall, we had about 177 programs in the capital program for the year. As councillors will note, there was a budget of about $45 million, of which nearly $28 million was spent, and a further $13.65 million was committed via contracts within the program. The report also provides you with a couple of appendices. One gives you details of each of the projects, and one gives you a bit of a breakdown and shows how the program was delivered by place. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you for that. Any questions from councillors? Is the recommendation before us, councillors? Yes, Councillor Ellis.
It's a very simple one, and I have read the briefing sheet, and I've just forgotten how many of those projects would have had to have come before council for approval in that financial year. Can you give me a rough idea? We've recently been quoted in the press, as councillors will recall, of being the most secretive council in the state, and yet this report is showing a large capital expenditure of many millions of dollars for these capital works projects. Perhaps Mr. Waits might be able to help me with that, because these sort of projects would have come in camera.
Yeah, thanks. Good question, Councillor Ellis. Mr. Waits.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Any projects that exceed, construction projects that exceed the requirement of $250,000, including GST, need to come to council. And that would, on average, when you look at the last few meetings, probably 2 to 4 contracts per meeting. So was that 50 for the year potentially, out of 180 projects?
Look, thanks for that. So we're looking at something around about the high, let's be generous and say in the high 30s to the low 40s, and that's something that needs to come in to maintain commercial in confidence, and it's these sorts of reports give people a clearer vision of the actual works that council undertakes in their operational budgets. That's all I have, Mr.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Councillor Ellis. The article referred to closed meetings, and in fact they were agenda items at an open meeting. So, any further questions on that? Yeah, Councillor Reeves.
My question is around combining capital works and landfill rehabilitation. And I know I've been a councillor this is my second term, but we combine the two, and they're two separate matters. We have had some adverse reporting also around landfill matters and reporting on landfill. And that's another concern that I have. They're not related, none of the story, but it's not all of the story either. And I'm just wondering, why do we combine those two matters? Chris, it's a great opportunity for you.
Thank you, Mr.
We
Waits.
combine the two, Councillor Reeves, because the works that are within this report are pretty much construction projects. Our waste rehabilitation projects can't actually be considered from a financial accounting point of view as a capital project. So they're an operating budget, but because they're capital in nature, they're a large construction project, we report them together.
Is there any further questions? If not, we do have that recommendation. We have a mover. Moved, Councillor Ellis. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Reeves. And speakers? No. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you, Ms. Weigel. Item 5.3.1 is the decision of Victorian Civil Administrative Tribunal, Councillor Pearce Edward Buckley versus Councillor Conduct Panel. Ms. Bennett.
Councillors, this report has its genesis in the Local Government Act, as so much of what corporate does. Under the Local Government Act, when a councillor conduct panel is convened and hands down a finding, we are required to report that to the next council meeting. Similarly, when that decision is appealed and VCAT considers the matter, we are required to report the outcome of that process to this meeting. And as indicated in the report, that was to uphold the decision of the Councillor Conduct Panel in the case of Councillor Buckley and suspend him for a period of 4 months. Because he's already served a month, he is currently on suspension for a period of 3 months. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. Questions from councillors? Councillor Roberts.
Let's throw caution to the wind here. Hypothetically, so there's a recommendation from VCAT to suspend Councillor Buckley. Does that mean that technically the council does not have to follow that recommendation?
Ms Bennett.
It's not actually a recommendation. VCAT has made a ruling, yes. So it's completely outside of council's control, as indeed was the original matter, which was launched by the Chief Municipal Inspector.
Yeah, Councillor Roberts.
So apart from noting it, why does it need to come before council, or is that a statutory obligation?
It is indeed required by the Local Government Act, and it must be in open council under the same instrument.
Any further questions of the recommendation before us? We have a mover. Move Councillor Reeves, second to Councillor Toohey. We'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 5.3.2 is review of council policies, and this one was the risk management policy. Ms Bennett, thank you.
Councillors, this report is the latest in the rolling report refreshment that we do. In this case, we're referring to the risk management policy. The policy has been referred to and considered by Council's Audit and Risk Committee, which was in agreement with the recommendations and the content of the documentation before you now. So the recommendation seeks your adoption of the policy and noting some other factors related to it. So I'm very happy to take any questions, otherwise the recommendation is before you.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. Any questions from councillors? We do have that recommendation. Have a mover for the recommendation. Councillor Toohey. Have a seconder. Councillor Ellis. Does any councillors have the urge to speak to this motion? No. I will therefore put the motion. All those in favour? Against? The motion's carried. Thank you. Item 5.3.3 is our investment policy review for 2018. Ms Bennett? Oh, we have Ms Collins in attendance. Thank you, Ms Collins.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Annually, Council reviews its investment policy, and we've undertaken a review of the former policy, and there's only been some minor amendments that have been made to the existing policy to the one that's presented for Council's consideration today. So, happy to take any questions. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Collins. Questions, councillors? We have a recommendation before us, councillors. Someone like to move that recommendation? Councillor Reeves. Do we have a second? Councillor White. Any speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. Thank you. So item 5.3.4 is a capital discretionary fund allocations for 2018-19, and in attendance we have Mr Richards. Thank you, Mr Richards. It was on before.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, the capital discretionary funds an annual allocation for smaller projects that have arisen outside Council's normal budget process. The guidelines for allocation are provided. There is a budget of $200,000. So we've identified projects totalling $145,000, leaving $55,000 for any unforeseen projects that come up later through the year. So the recommended projects are listed for adoption.
Thank you, Mr Richards. Is there any questions for Mr Richards from councillors? If not, we have a recommendation. Moved Councillor Reeves, seconded Councillor Roberts. Councillor Reeves.
Yep, happy to speak to this one. The previous policy and this are not unrelated. Good investment, good carriage and management of our money allows us to invest in our communities, and these small investments go a long way. We know that a dollar spent can have a multiplier effect 4, 5, 6 times in our small communities, and this is great. As I said earlier, you can't cut your way to prosperity. You have to invest your way into success, and this is a great opportunity to do it. Well done, Council.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Councillor Roberts, did you want to speak? Any further speakers? Question?
I mean, it's a bit hard to follow Councillor Reeves, isn't it? But I'm trying.
You're going to speak for it, Councillor Ellis?
I'm speaking for it, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor, and what I'm saying is that this is another one of those, where am I looking? I've lost my language. Yeah, I haven't I? What I was going to say, this is another one of the funding streams that Council provides to its community, which is of great importance. It is a stream that hasn't been reviewed for a long time. In fact, the total bucket has remained constant for probably 2 terms that I'm aware of. So I will look forward to discussing perhaps an increase for these community funds into the next budgeting process that'll commence later in the year and early next year.
That's a good point, Councillor Ellis. Very good point. Would any councillors like to make that part of this motion, that we review that increase? Yeah. Yeah. The mover and seconder happy with that?
Yep. We might have to keep the director in this chair longer than acting CEO.
If there's no further speakers, I'll put that motion with that addition. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Good suggestion. Thank you. So item 5.3.5 is a memorandum of understanding between East Gippsland Shire Council and Round Oak Minerals Proprietary Limited, Stockman Mine Project, Benambra. Ms Nelson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Yes, this report presents to Council a revised MOU, which has been something that Council entered into back in 2012 when there was first discussions about the Stockman Mine project being progressed in our municipality. It was an early step at the time that Council took and seen as quite a proactive step, focusing on things that we believed were important to the community, which weren't necessarily picked up through the formal approval processes associated with the mine. It's a voluntary agreement, so it's a document that has been worked on by officers with representatives of Round Oak Minerals. The MOU that's presented today, you'll see from the marked up version, is substantially based on the original MOU document, but has been edited to reflect the time that has elapsed and the current status of the project and any factual information about the fact that the mine has actually changed hands. So while Council did originally formally resolve to enter into the MOU in 2016, Council resolved to continue to keep the MOU live, but understand what the future of the mine might be, as at that time it was put on hold. More recently, the mine project has been divested and is now owned by Round Oak Minerals, and they are actively working at the moment towards finalising the necessary approvals that are required to progress the mine. And should those approvals be concluded and the right investment circumstances exist, our understanding is that they would make a decision to proceed with the proposal in the new year. What this is about is really about Council being proactive and working jointly with the proponents to make sure that we maximise opportunities for the community and also to minimise the project happening in East Gippsland Shire. I've probably said enough and I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you, Ms Nelson.
Detail.
Questions, Councillor Ellis?
This is only a clarification point, and Ms Nelson, I actually did refer to it during the question time earlier, and that is that questions have been raised in the community about what is the $40,000 that council's going to co-contribute to the MOU, and the second part of the question would be what would be some examples of the monies being spent? You know, what sort of projects would that monies be spent on?
Thanks, Councillor Ellis.
Yeah, so it's pretty normal with an MOU or something where we're agreeing on joint actions that you actually have the resources to act on those. Otherwise, there's no point having an MOU. You don't have the ability to actually act on the things that you intend to implement. So you'll notice in the MOU document, it's not all about resourcing it with cash commitments, so there's sharing information and staff resources, but there is an amount mentioned up to $40,000 from each organisation to be put towards priority actions, and some of those actions include initiatives to look at a housing accord, for example, so something that's not necessarily part of Council's strategic planning work plan, but where there is a need to understand how do we support investment in appropriate housing to support population growth that might be experienced in OMEO that has a longer term use or value or purpose in OMEO. Should, at the end of the mine we're left with housing, how can it be used? How can we make sure that not all of the rental housing that would normally be available to community members be consumed by people working in the mine? How do we deal with those housing issues? So that's one example, and there's a number of examples of other projects or actions in there. Not all of them will require funds, and we're not suggesting that they be allocated necessarily as anything outside of the current budget, because a lot of this is really falls into the criteria of business as usual for parts of the organisation that will be involved in undertaking actions. But it's there demonstrating a commitment by both organisations to actually implement the MOU more than anything else.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On regards to the point that Dick brought up, regarding the $40,000 you say putting towards joint co-contribution, we just renewed our MOU for 2018 with East Gippsland Water, and I don't recall there being a contribution of that kind of amount.
No, and most of the things in the MOU with East Gippsland Water are things that are business as usual, that each organisation would have responsibility to commit to. What we're looking at here is working proactively with a commercial entity and asking them to contribute to things that benefit the community and place them in good stead as a commercial entity operating in this municipality. And so it's a clear, we're looking for a clear commitment that both organisations will actually commit to implementing these actions. Two public organisations, probably a slightly different kettle of fish, but certainly in the case of East Gippsland Water and East Gippsland Shire, it's the CEOs who agree on the work plan and resources that go with the annual schedule, what we're going to do. And so if the CEOs are committing to it, then we're committing where each community resources. Right? It's not as explicit as a dollar value, but it has the same meaning.
Yeah, and I think I'm right in saying that this year's MOU we identified some renewable energy projects and waste projects that we could potentially work up into capital type projects that would come back to the individual organisations for further consideration.
Yeah, that's right. So there's an undertaking given by each organisation to commit resources to the outcomes that are being sought. Here it's more explicit, absolutely, and I think it needs to be in this context. I appreciate that there has been some concern about how that would operate. And so in the revised document that's presented today, it makes it very clear that each entity would manage its own funds, although the actions would be jointly agreed to. And the priorities will need to be determined and jointly agreed. These are the priorities that need to happen. We may not spend $40,000 per annum. It just depends what the priorities actually are. So it's an up to amount.
Thank you. Ms Nelson, any further questions? Have a recommendation before us, councillors. We have a mover. Moved Councillor Reeves. Have a seconder. Councillor Toohey. The speakers.
I'm happy to talk to this. We've seen this MOU in its previous form, and I think it's good to revisit it with the new ownership and the new proposal. And just to again remind ourselves that we're not the approval agency, so we don't determine whether this goes ahead or not. We're not the board members. We don't determine whether it's a financial benefit. But one thing I do say is that it's a bit of like a Chinese proverb of Chinese business, that you only do business with your friends and you wouldn't do anything to upset your friends. And so to have an MOU with a large potential investor, there's less likelihood that they'll do anything untoward to our Shire, and they're more likely to do things to the benefit of our Shire. And that could be socially, economically, environmentally. And so to have that close working relationship is really, really important. As I said, you never do anything that would be untoward towards your friends. So to set up an MOU like this is about developing a close working relationship and friendship, and that will only be beneficial for everyone. And I think that should reassure the likes of our questioners today who asked those open questions, that while we don't have direct ability to influence environmental decisions, we can actually work with that organisation to ensure that they do make the right decisions, because they wouldn't want to hurt us.
Speakers against the motion. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. While I appreciate the sentiments of Councillor Reeves, I believe a lot of resources have already been committed to this project to help improve the relationship between East Gippsland Shire and Round Oaks Minerals. The Benambra school site as one, with quite a good lease arrangement. I think at a time when you're seeing such severe drought that we are, and farmers that are struggling to keep their stock alive, I think $40,000 could be contributed better in other areas, considering the commercial entity receives a lot of resources from other areas, and they're not doing hard in this respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
So I'll respond to that. Within
speakers.
For, against? Or?
Yeah. You're speaking against? Yeah. You can have your right of reply. Yeah.
I would just like to say it's quite beneficial to have had Wayne's presentation prior to this, in looking at the community grants that we have, and a value of $200,000 for the whole Shire, and the fact that we've now put a motion forward to look at increasing that. And I feel like Councillor Roberts that a $40,000 investment in such a small place in the Shire, I think is, to me, is just a little bit extreme when the rest of the Shire is receiving such a small amount. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor White. Speakers for the motion. Yep. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to support Councillor Reeves' words and the actions as outlined in the report presented to Council today. The monies and the actions are really important for the well-being of not just only Benambra but for the wider region, and the cooperative behaviours as exhibited in these MOUs are critical for taking the full advantage of any economic benefit a newcomer to the region can offer. This is a well thought out document, and the $40,000 can only add to the benefit of the wider community and not just the small area. I commend the recommendation and the report.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Any speakers against? Further speakers? Movers have got the right of reply. Councillor Reeves.
Councillors who have spoken against it, I urge you to just rethink what you've just said in terms of gratuities to farmers in drought. $40,000 will only buy you a couple of truckloads of feed. $40,000 invested, as we've spoken many times today, will be reinvested 4, 5 or 6 times over if it's invested well. Drought, also we've heard, those of us who were there with Minister Pulford the other day and heard the farmers who are suffering are calling for the likes of opportunities for off-farm employment to supplement their farm, and those farmers who are around the table will understand the importance of that. So here's an opportunity to invest in that off-farm opportunities for work in the Omeo region where they are struggling. $40,000 is not a huge amount. And a lot of that is also, councillors, stop and read the report, in kind. So that's the sort of work that we can actually attribute to some of the investment that our council officers do, in advocating, in helping around whatever projects there are that might come out of this. And they are detailed in here. The report also mentions that, in the agreement that the proponents, Round Oak, will set up a $150,000 community fund. So many times more than our investment. So again, councillors, just stop and think what you're doing. You don't actually do anything to hurt the people who are your friends. And this is an olive branch and a way of keeping those people, that organisation, in the tent. And if you are thinking that $40,000 is a bad investment for potentially 200 jobs, then stop and have a long, hard look at yourselves.
Okay, I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Motion's carried. 4 for and 2 against. Brings us to item 6, urgent and other business. Any councillors have any urgent or other business? I would just like to raise in this spot that Councillor Roberts and myself have requested an update on the EPA notification breach and fine, and just wanted to confirm that's coming to our next briefing. Yep, thank you. We have item 7, which is the confidential business. We just need that motion, councillors. Yes, please. No, not yet.
Right, I think I'm reading the right one. I ask that council now close in accordance with the terms and provisions of section 89, subsection 2 of the Local Government Act 1989 to consider items 7.1 to 7.4 as these items relate to contractual matters.
It's moved Councillor Ellis, seconded Councillor Reeves. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you.